Greetings. Welcome to another BankBeat Conversations with Tom Bengtson. My name is Tom Bengtson. I'm the publisher of BankBeat magazine, bankbeat.biz, the website, and also our other regional magazine, Bank News. I'm really pleased today to have as my guest Bryan Bruns. Bryan is the president and CEO of Lake Central Bank in Annandale, Minnesota. Bryan, thank you very much for being here.
Well, thank you.
And many of you might know that Bryan was the BankBeat selection for 2024 Banker of the Year. I hope that you have your issue. You can read a pretty in-depth feature about Bryan, his bank, and his work in the industry in our January issue. And congratulations on that recognition.
Thank you very much. It's certainly an honor, and just off the top, I'll definitely tell you that I shared with my staff and my board. It really should be considered to be Bank of the Year, because I certainly wouldn't be able to do what I do without my board, without my staff. And I think it's I want to publicly thank both of them for that.
Absolutely. Well, certainly I think it comes across in the article that you have a great team, and that's really exciting. And of course, it's a tough time to be in banking. Interest rates the economy is certainly unpredictable. And we're in an environment that we haven't been in for over a decade. There are all kinds of challenges in the industry right now with respect to regulations, competition, staffing. As you look at the landscape, what do you make of it all? Where do you see the opportunities? And what do you consider to be the most formidable challenges?
You know, it's interesting because I just love the industry. Community banking to me is something I have in my passion for. And so I look at all of those as definitely challenges, but I don't look at those as impediments. I'm going to continue on in this business. And so you just look to solve those challenges. So interest rates are going down. You try and figure out whether or not you can go a little bit longer with your assets that you have so that you can sustain some of that income that you have. You turn around, and if you have staffing issues, we've been very successful at looking at some of the spouses of, say, some teachers. We have a school in our community, and we look at maybe for some spouses that are driving to the cities. We also look at the same kind of professions and train them for banking. So if we wanted to have somebody that's in finances, we would maybe not necessarily just limit to banking, but train them for that. Or commercial lenders, you really need a salesperson, and then we can train them for banking. Okay. So that's how we've done some of those challenges.
And we've talked a little bit about how uniquely situated Annandale is. I mean, it is definitely a ways from the Twin Cities, but it's a beautiful vacation spot, and people have their cabins in that area, and that is really proven to be a pretty vibrant community for a bank like yours.
It's been. I was sharing earlier that Annandale has 26 lakes in a 10-mile radius of our bank, and so the city proper is about 3,500 people, but that expands out if you get to the lake community. And so there's just a ton of opportunity for people to come out, especially after the COVID years now when people working remotely. We're seeing more and more people working in our area 2 or 3 days a week. It helps our town. It keeps things kind of vibrant. So it's been a good niche from being about an hour west of Minneapolis.
Sure. And what do you make of the economy in your community? You mentioned it's a town of, I think you said 3,500 people. Are you finding that there's loan demand? Is it in the business sector or more in the residential side? Or tell us a little bit about the economy right there locally in Annandale.
Yeah, it's a real interesting dynamic because I think nationally, there are people that consumers are going more and more digital online to maybe get some offerings. But our area is pretty conservative, so there is some skepticism as to how much the economy is going to stay chugging along. So there's probably a little bit less loan demand right now than we would like in our own community, just because I think people are saving and trying to predict what's going to happen in the future. But at the same time, we have depositors we have money that's building up with the deposits. So we know that the economy is churning. It's good. The lake community that I just mentioned, that keeps our prices high because they're not making new real estate on lakes anymore. So those prices kind of stay up and keeps our economy kind of chugging along.
Mm-hmm. And technology, of course, is such a big part of banking these days. But really, I would imagine you didn't get into banking because you like technology, right?
No.
And so many bank CEOs that I know, maybe grew up on the credit side and they're good at that kind of analysis, but the tech stuff is really kind of foreign. How do you deal with the challenge of implementing the right amount of technology at your bank?
So one of the things that we always say at our bank is that we are small enough to know you, but we're big enough to serve you. And that to me speaks to the technology part of it. So I use the analogy when I go to the grocery store, they have the automated checkouts that you can go to, self-service checkouts. And for me, if there's anybody in line at the live places, I will automatically go and just check out myself. But if there is nobody in line, I will actually go through and try and interact with those. I think that's kind of the way that we try and run our bank. I don't want to put the automated teller in that we don't have any interaction, or I want to put the auto attendant on the phone. I want to pick up the phone, I want to talk to people and greet them. But we also know that we have customers that want to deposit a check at 2 o'clock in the morning, and so we have to have the remote deposit. And that's kind of our balance that I'm constantly trying to do. We want personal touch, but we have to have the convenience for the customer or they're going to wind up going someplace else.
Mm-hmm. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about some of your industry association involvement, but just to jump ahead a little bit, you're very active with the American Bankers Association. I believe you're on the board. And a couple years ago, you were involved in a core platform committee, whereby I know you invited the heads of, I believe it was a dozen or more core processing companies to come in and kind of share their ideas about how they approached core processing and technology, and share that at a community bankers conference. Tell me about that experience, and did you get some knowledge and insight into the whole tech situation that you didn't have before?
Yes, it was. I feel very fortunate to be part of that. When you step back from a small little community bank in rural Minnesota and you get to sit down and have a discussion with all the CEOs and all of the major players in the core system, you learn a ton. I will credit the industry, as they always do. They try to get a wide and diverse group of people together. So not only were there CEOs on our group, but there were technologists on our group. And so when we talked about kind of the core principles that we wanted to establish in the industry, we looked at things like fair contracts. Well, it tended to be that the CEOs kind of leaned towards a subgroup in dealing with fair contracts. Whereas if you wanted to look at open APIs, CEOs didn't know what we were talking about. So the technologists in the room kind of took that over. And I think we really did a good job of trying to explain where the pain points are in our industry. And the main message that has now developed after, I think it's been 4.5 or 5 years now, is we as CEOs really need to take the opportunity to step back and look at what is it that we want? What do we want in our bank? What's the strategy? Do you want the core in the box? You want one place to go to and you just ride along with their technology strategy? Or do you want to kind of have your core and then attach all of the best in breed products to that? That takes a different staffing level, that takes a different strategic plan, that takes a different budget level, how to manage it. So I think the main key that I've learned from there is, as CEOs, we need to figure out what do we want and then pick the right core provider that actually melds in that with that. And it was 29. We met with 29
Oh
different
my
core
word,
providers.
I didn't realize it was that many.
So
okay.
and most people don't. They think there's 3 or 4, but
Wow.
there are 29 different core providers out there.
Okay, well, no question, it's a complex decision and process. Do you feel like you have the mechanisms in place to regularly be communicating with your customers so you hear what they want? I mean, that's got to really be what's driving how you approach this.
I think we do. We put in a couple years ago kind of a customer relationship management tool that when customers call in, we try to note what they're calling about, why they're calling, and then that's something I can look at in the background and kind of keep track of when customers are calling. If they're asking about a bunch of, years ago they're asking about bill pay. Well, that we knew that there was a demand and we put that in years ago. I always say, if you go way back, which I've been around this industry for a while now, customers used to walk in and say, do you have an ATM? Now they come in and say, where are your ATM? Where's your ATM located? They also used to come in and say, do you have online banking? Now they say, what is your online banking address? And I think that same thing is true. You can't, we are too small to be on that bleeding edge of technology, but we want to get to that point before the customers are saying, how do I do bill pay? We better have it by the time they get to that, not if we have bill pay.
Now, you've mentioned a couple of times that you're from a small bank. In fact, between $215 and $220 million in assets, so that's certainly a sizable organization. Yep. And in the past year, you did do an acquisition, and there weren't that many acquisitions last year, so that certainly is saying something. But State Bank of Danvers joined your holding company. Tell us a little bit about how that deal happened and maybe what you learned from it.
Sure. We've kind of made it known to all of our professionals that we would be certainly interested in purchasing another bank. Looked at a couple of deals over the last few years. So it was, towards the end of the year last year that got a call from a couple of different professionals that said, hey, there's might be something that you're interested in, signed a non-disclosure agreement, and then started looking at it. Most people in your audience knows that you wind up putting in a first bid, then you wind up going you may or may not get to the second phase. So we progressed through that. But I can tell you that I've heard over the years that it's culture that's the big thing. And the very first meeting we had with the staff at the State Bank of Danvers, we knew it was a good fit culturally. So that made us a little bit more excited to do this. And so then it's turned out to be really a good deal. They fit our culture. They treat their customers the same way that we do. We're such a small bank that they didn't have the services available that we even have. And so we're able to give way more tools now to their toolbox to give those customers. So the thing I've learned from it is it doesn't go as fast as I would like. Yeah. So if it takes time to get everybody lined up with that. It takes time to make a decision about when do you do a core conversion, when do you merge the two things. Today, as we have it, they're two separate charters. So we've done some backroom consolidation, payroll, working on some accounts payable, those types of things, but the customers still are kind of in two different silos at this point.
Okay, yeah, and I'm sure it's an enormous project, and I don't know whether you sort of head that up or whether somebody on your team kind of heads up the integration, but I can't imagine all the questions you have to sort out.
Yeah, it's my career, you mentioned that most presidents come through the lending side. Yeah. I'm the unique one in that I came through the operations side. Okay, so I had the fortune after college of working for the Carl Pohlid's organization, Marquette Bank, and did a lot of the operations stuff. And so I helped with different conversions. So I actually, in this particular case, am kind of taking the lead on this one, which my staff gets real scared about because I'll start doing, and then Bryan's kind of off to this side and this side. But it's just been a real a joy to get to know both our current Lake Central Bank staff has been excited about the change. And then when you look at the State Bank of Danvers, they're really excited about joining and having more tools for their own customers.
Sure. Well, congratulations on that deal, and best of luck with the integration and the future for both organizations. Let's shift the conversation a little bit toward some of your association involvement, sure. And I'm going to relate that to the regulatory environment. Okay. I know, well, obviously you were president of the Minnesota Bankers Association 2012 to 13, yep. And that's a long time ago already, but I know that you remain active with the MBA. You're of course active with the American Bankers Association, and one of the ways in which your involvement with the association has manifested is by working with the regulatory agencies. I say working with. Mm-hmm. If we can say, a lawsuit represents working with somebody, right? Nobody ever wants to have to sue somebody, but mm-hmm. Obviously, MBA, you felt very strongly about this representment fee that the FDIC was focusing on in the past year. Can you share a little bit about the lawsuit with us, where it stands today, and why you felt so strongly that Sure. you actually put your name and your bank on the line for this issue?
Yeah, so first I'd just correct you to say that I don't feel so strongly about the non-sufficient fee.
Okay.
That's not really the issue.
Okay.
It's the process that it is. So I'm afraid that if the FDIC gets away with doing this, what is next? What's happening next? And so to me, it's the process. I am certainly not an attorney, but there is a procedure that you have to go through in order to get a regulation that is going to be changed, certainly one that's been long-standing. So as an industry, we felt pretty strongly that you can't try and regulate us with microphones. You need to actually give us an opportunity to have a discussion. So in our opinion, there was a procedural change. We were required to give new disclosures, but there were no laws that changed. And so that process should have gone through the APA, that whole act of getting public comment. So to me, you don't know, how does the consumer feel? Do they want to be hounded by the retailers if we're returning those things, or do they want the retailer to be able to send back and collect it a little bit more privately? We don't know how the retailers feel with that. If for example, there's regulations already, why are they continuing to look at the path of least resistance for sending that check in? So my whole point of that is there's all kinds of arguments that the industry never had because they didn't go through the procedure to have those public debates and to then make a ruling. And certainly after you make a ruling, you have to look forward. You can't change the rules and tell us that you have to go backwards and fix things.
Right. So what you're referring to is the Administrative Procedures Act. And
Correct.
so I get that. That's a very, we have that, the Administrative Procedures Act, for a reason.
Correct.
And it does require the regulators to, if they want to expand an interpretation of a particular rule, they have to have public hearings, they have to give people time to comment.
Yep.
So this is what you're talking about, is this
Without a
discovery,
doubt.
which just never happened. So that is pretty interesting. Why do you think the regulators, I mean, it's kind of like they're taking a shortcut, right? I mean, they want something, but they're not really going through all the requirements of the APA to get there. So,
Yep.
I mean, why are they doing that? Or what do you make of that?
I can only speculate. To me, it's maybe a product of our environment today. Politically, we have people that are so far on the right, so far on the left, they take up sides, and they don't let the legislation kind of come out the way it's supposed to be, which is, let's have debate, and if we have enough votes, we'll change the rules. If we don't have enough votes, then we can't change the rules. But now you're seeing executive orders, you're seeing, I mean, on both sides.
Yeah.
And I think that's spilling over into the regulatory environment. I think regulators in Washington sometimes get frustrated that there's so many different, when they have the debate, there are so many different opinions that you have to take into account. You may not get what you want in the end. So I remember back in the day when the regulators were very non-partisan. And I think that we're seeing, certainly not in the ranks and files of the FDIC or the OCC or anybody else, that most of the people that we deal with are very professional with that and kind of leave their politics out of it. But I do think as we become more and more polarized, there are more and more regulators at the top that are becoming more political. That's the only answer that I can see.
Sure. Well, it's very interesting to think about it because, of course, forever, regulators and bankers have debated issues. That's not
Absolutely.
new, right? I mean, that's just part of working together. And over the years, generally, things have kind of worked out. But it's only recently that we've seen sort of a spate of lawsuits, right? And a lawsuit is kind of an act of last resort. I mean, you don't just go to lawsuit first thing, right? That means you've tried a bunch of other things and they failed. So what's left but to file a lawsuit? So
Correct.
even now, we've got a lawsuit that ABA is involved in with respect to the Community Reinvestment Act and some amendments that are being considered there. So it's kind of a sad commentary, at least as I'm seeing it, as to where we've come as a culture and being able to work out our differences.
I couldn't agree more. And you said it best. Nobody wants to start with a lawsuit, but at some point you just have to take a stand.
Sure. Okay. Well, let me just ask you to wrap up by maybe thinking about the near future, the next year, the next couple of years. with all of the changes that are happening in terms of technology, in terms of what customers are expecting from their banks? I mean, as you look out ahead, how does it make you feel? Are you excited about it, or does it make you nervous, or what would you say?
I think you always have to be a little nervous, or you're not pushing it just enough. So yeah, I think it's one of those things: is how fast do I need to make that next technology move? Do my vendors line up? And from an immediate standpoint, when I look at our acquisition in Bengtson with the State Bank of Danvers, there's going to be some change there a little bit. Those customers are going to be there, and how are those customers going to react? We take pride in knowing our community of Annandale. We have people that know our community in Clearwater. We've acquired a really good staff in Bengtson that knows their community, but how are they going to respond to some of the changes that are coming with that? So that's kind of what keeps me up at night in these days.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being with us and sharing these thoughts. I love to have these kinds of conversations. It's, of course, a fascinating industry, and I feel like at BankBeat and Bank News, we get to be in the front row watching all this, and I appreciate you being willing to come on and share all of this with us. So thank you very much for being with us on this BankBeat Conversations. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you next time.